Vesak Day, joining Buddhists around the world in celebration of a day honoring the life, legacy, and teachings of Buddha. This occasion also provides us with an opportunity to acknowledge the contributions of Buddhist communities around the world, communities that have helped to build a better world for people of all faith traditions. Let us all recommit ourselves to upholding the timeless values of tolerance, compassion, and respect that are imbued in the Buddhist faith. Happy Buddha Purnima. Next, the international community has witnessed horrific atrocities perpetrated by Russia's forces since President Putin launched his devastating and unjustifiable war of choice against Ukraine. We are working through partnerships with U.S. academia and the private sector to assist current and future quests for justice following months of fighting and mounting evidence of these widespread, large-scale atrocities that have been committed. To ensure that crimes committed by Russia's forces are documented and perpetrators are held accountable, today we have launched a new conflict observatory for Ukraine. The program will capture, analyze, and make publicly available open source information and evidence of atrocities, human rights abuses, and harm to civilian infrastructure, including Ukraine's cultural heritage. Forthcoming reports will be posted on the program's website, conflictobservatory.org. The information collected by the Conflict Observatory will be a resource for the world to see the deplorable and brutal actions of Russia's forces against the Ukrainian people. It will shine a light on atrocities and is intended to contribute to eventual prosecutions in Ukraine's domestic courts, courts in third-party countries, U.S. courts, and other relevant tribunals. It will provide information to refute Russia's disinformation campaigns and expand the range of our and our partners' accountability mechanisms. However long it takes, we are committed to seeing that justice is served. In Guatemala yesterday, President Giammattei chose to reappoint Maria Consuelo Porras, Argueta de Porras, as Attorney General despite her record of facilitating corruption. This is a step backward for Guatemalan democracy, transparency, and rule of law, a step that will hurt the people of Guatemala. During her tenure, Attorney General Porras has worked to dismantle Guatemala's justice sector, protect corrupt actors, and perpetuate impunity. She has a documented record of obstructing and undermining anti-corruption investigations in Guatemala to protect her allies and gain undue favor. Porras' pattern of obstruction includes reportedly ordering prosecutors in Guatemala's public ministry to ignore cases based on personal or political considerations and firing prosecutors who investigate cases involving acts of corruption. This corruption weakens the Guatemalan government's ability to reduce violence and stop narco-traffickers. It also slows down economic growth and scares away investments, robbing Guatemalans of jobs and opportunity, all of which are primary factors driving migration. Yesterday, as a result, we announced the public designation of the Attorney General under Section 7013C of the Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriation Act of 2022. This designation renders the Attorney General and her immediate family members ineligible for entry into the United States. We'll have more announcements about consequences for the bilateral relationship of this decision at the appropriate time, and will continue to robustly use our counter-corruption tools going forward. The United States is determined to stand with all Guatemalans in support of democracy and the rule of law and against those who would undermine these principles for personal gain. We call on the government of Guatemala to take serious, concrete steps to reverse democratic backsliding. And finally, on Monday, May 23rd, the United States will welcome the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, Secretary General His Excellency Hussein Brahim Taha, and the OIC delegation to Washington, D.C. for the inaugural U.S.-OIC Strategic Dialogue. The United States and the OIC have been close partners for decades, and we share enduring economic, social, cultural, and person-to-person ties with the organization and its 57 members. The launching of this dialogue is an important affirmation of our growing ties. The dialogue will be led on our side by our Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs Assistant Secretary Yael Limpert and other senior department officials. On Wednesday, May 25th, Secretary Blinken will meet with the OIC Secretary General. We'll discuss shared challenges and opportunities in the fight against climate change, our support for greater respect for human rights the world over, mutual goals regarding women's empowerment and health issues, and our commitment to countering violent extremism. The strategic dialogue with the OIC is also part of our commitment to working closely with multilateral organizations, and it shows the depth and breadth of our shared interests. Through our sustained engagement, we'll further this important partnership and enable greater joint efforts to address shared challenges. So, having said all that, there may be time for a final question or two.
Thank you. Let me see. I got a couple very brief logistical ones, but they'll only be brief if you keep your answers brief.
Okay.
So let me make that appeal.
Okay.
Just one on this Ukraine observatory.
Yes.
I'm not quite. What exactly is new about? I mean, aren't you guys already doing this?
Well, it's a new mechanism, and essentially we are providing millions of dollars worth of funding to our partners on the outside.
Already providing millions of dollars of funding?
Well, yes, to partners to work with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, but this is a new mechanism, and it's a new mechanism that will encompass the efforts of some of our key partners, including Yale, including ESRI, Planetscape AI, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative.
And these institutions or groups weren't involved before?
You would have to ask them about their level of involvement before, but this is the first time we've launched a portal like this that will not only be a mechanism by which the department can work with these outside organizations to collect, to analyze, to document, but also importantly to share the findings that together we're able to uncover. And just as I said, they will be shared publicly on the website.
Well, I think you've said almost the exact same thing as it relates to the collection of war crimes evidence in the past. So anyway, it's fine that you have a new mechanism. I just want to know if there's fundamentally you're still doing the same thing, right?
We have been engaged in the work through a variety of mechanisms and efforts to collect, to document, to analyze, to share evidence of potential atrocities, potential war crimes with relevant prosecutors, with relevant state entities, with relevant organizations. But this is the first time that these partners will have come together and to share those findings so that not only the public can see it, to shine a spotlight on what Russia's forces are doing in Ukraine, but so that relevant authorities in areas of appropriate jurisdiction, including within Ukraine, potentially including within the United States, so that prosecutors can potentially even build criminal cases based on the material that is published online.
On the Afghan embassy and consulates thing, did I point it out to you earlier?
We will get you updated information on that.
Do you know why, off the top of your head, the Afghan mission to the UN is not included in?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The Afghan mission to the UN is not one of the facilities that is being quote unquote seized, taken control.
I don't have any more details to share, but if we do, we'll let you know.
On the Secretary's meeting tomorrow with the Turkish Foreign Minister, are you guys more, less, or the same concerned about what President Erdogan's position is on Finland and Sweden?
Well, you heard the Secretary speak to this over the weekend in Berlin. And the Secretary was in Berlin to meet with his counterparts in the context of a NATO ministerial. He had an opportunity to meet with Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu there, to speak with him. Other NATO members did as well. The Secretary, as you alluded to, Matt, will have an opportunity to see the Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, on the sidelines of the UN event tomorrow in New York City. What the Secretary said is that he, of course, and we, of course, won't characterize private conversations, but there was over the weekend, and there has been a strong consensus for bringing Finland and Sweden into the alliance if they so choose. The Secretary made the point that we are confident that we will be able to preserve that consensus should Finland, should Sweden formally apply for NATO membership. Of course, that has not yet happened. I know there's a perception that it may be a foregone conclusion, but precedent, protocol, procedure, all those P words are very important, especially in the world of diplomacy. So we'll reserve further comments until we hear additional.
Well, but there seem to be, at best, conflicting, if not absolutely contradictory positions coming from the President and then President Erdogan, and then apparently the people who the Secretary and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg have been, and the other foreign ministers have been talking to, because Erdogan's comments yesterday were very clear in raising opposition. So are you still seeking clarification of the Turkish position?
It is not for us to speak for the Turkish government, of course. It is for us to speak as a member of the NATO alliance. And Secretary Blinken, who had the opportunity to sit in on the foreign ministerial discussions in Berlin over the weekend, came away with the same sense of confidence that there was strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden into the alliance if they so choose to join, and we're confident we'll be able to preserve that consensus. Daphne?
I mean, Erdogan said yesterday that Swedish and Finnish delegations should not bother coming to Ankara to convince it to approve their NATO bid. I mean, I just don't understand how you're reconciling that there's this consensus when Turkey's telling them not even to bother coming.
Again, it is not for me to speak for the Turkish government or to characterize their position. What we can do is characterize what we heard inside the NATO ministerial, what we have heard in bilateral and multilateral, including in conversations as an alliance with our fellow NATO allies. There is strong consensus. There has been strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden if they so choose to join. And again, as you heard from the Secretary, we are confident we'll be able to preserve that consensus.
Has Turkey asked for anything from the U.S. in exchange for supporting their bids?
Again, we're not going to read out private conversations. The Secretary did have a chance to see the Foreign Minister, Çavuşoğlu, in Berlin. He will have a chance to see him in New York City, and I'm certain these conversations will continue. Francesco?
Just to follow up on that, you keep referring to the confidence that emerged from the meeting over the weekend, and we're referring to what President Erdogan said yesterday. So is that confidence still there, and what explains your confidence as the President Erdogan said the contrary publicly?
I am explaining our confidence in the context of discussions that we have had bilaterally, multilaterally, and together as an alliance. Again, it is not for me to characterize the Turkish government's position. It is for us to characterize our position. You know where we stand. Should Finland and Sweden opt to apply for NATO membership, you have heard from a range of other NATO allies of their positions on this. Some have been quite explicit. I'm sure more will be if and when we hear that Finland and or Sweden are formally applying for the alliance. But all of the conversations we have had to date lend us that sense of confidence that we will be able to preserve that strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden if they so choose to apply.
And so today, after President Erdogan spoke yesterday, you are confident that Turkey will not be a roadblock on the way that path?
Our assessment of the sentiment among our NATO allies and within the NATO alliance has not changed.
Can I follow up on more?
Kelly?
Yeah. So I'm just, you refuse to answer the question if Turkey's asking the United States for anything to allow Sweden and Finland to join. You said that was private discussions. But if Turkey does leverage this moment to get something that it wants from NATO members in return for green-lighting these two countries joining, doesn't that set a dangerous precedent? Can you speak to efforts underway to make sure that precedent isn't set?
Your question entails a hypothetical that's on top of a hypothetical. Neither country have yet put forward an application for membership. Turkey, of course, has not made any specific asks or requests. So I will respectfully dodge the question on those two grounds. But again, we are having these conversations among allies bilaterally and as an alliance with the 30 existing NATO allies. Those conversations will continue. Secretary Blinken, again, will have an opportunity to speak to Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu. Other conversations are ongoing between and among current NATO allies and with potential aspirant countries.
And just one more question. Are you confident that Turkey's concerns will be in the rearview mirror by the time the leaders of Sweden and Finland come to the White House later this week?
We are confident that we will be able to preserve the consensus within the alliance of strong support for a potential application of Finland and Sweden. Yes. Stay on the same topic, sure.
Based on your responses, is it fair for us to assume that you still don't have clear understanding of what Turkey wants?
The Turkish officials have made public statements. I would refer you to those public statements, including some statements that have been referenced here already.
Well,
Yeah.
but that doesn't clear up anything, because the statements that
Again, it is
we get you telling us that in Berlin the Turks were all on board, and then the president of the country comes out yesterday and says he's not on board.
It is not up to me to characterize what the Turkish government's position is.
That's not the question. Is do you understand what the Turkish position is?
I will leave it to the Turkish government to articulate.
Is it clear to you?
To articulate their position.
Is it clear to the United States government
Two
what the Turkish
major
position
issues.
is?
So one is media freedom in Georgia, and the second one will be about the rights of the LGBTQI community in Georgia as well. So yesterday, the director of Tabari channel, Nika Varamia, was imprisoned for 3.5 years. Based on the verdict by the Georgian City Court, the U.S. ambassador to Georgia issued the statement on this that reads, and I'm quoting, "The disturbing pattern of selective investigations and prosecution targeting those in opposition to the current government undermines the public's confidence in the police, prosecution, the courts, and the government itself." The ranking member of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee, Jim Risch, tweeted as well, and I'm quoting, "Silencing political opposition will send Georgia in a very troubling direction." That's the channel that I work for. I don't know if I have a job next week or not. That's the same concern that my team in Tbilisi has. So, taking into account how much U.S. government values and cherish the importance of free media worldwide, what do you have to say about that?
We have been quite clear, quite candid with our Georgian partners about the continued need to strengthen the pillars of democracy that we want to see bolstered in Georgia, that we want to see bolstered around the world. That includes democratic institutions. It includes the rule of law as well. And we'll continue to partner with the people of Georgia as they pursue a democratic, prosperous, peaceful, and Euro-Atlantic future. When it comes to media freedom, you have heard us consistently speak to the indispensability of a free, of an independent media the world over. Secretary Blinken just a couple weeks ago spoke to this in extended remarks at the Foreign Press Center here in Washington, D.C., where he extolled the virtue and really the necessity of a free and independent media, noting that over the past year, too many journalists have been repressed, too much of their work has been suppressed, and too many, tragically, have been wounded or even killed in the line of duty. And of course, their duty is to do nothing more than to report the truth, to spread the truth the world over, using nothing more than a pen and perhaps a keyboard. So we'll continue to stand resolutely behind independent media, whether it's in Georgia, whether it is anywhere around the world.
And on the LGBTQI rights in Georgia, that community still cannot enjoy their constitutional rights to a peaceful assembly and the freedom of expression, because Georgian Orthodox Church and pro-Russian ultra-nationalists persecute them and threaten to, beat and kill anyone who tries to rally in the streets. So Georgian government and the law enforcement do not guarantee their safety. The Prime Minister last year called for not holding the peaceful rally because the police was unable to protect them from the violent mob. How much of a support should the members of the LGBTQI community in Georgia expect from the United States?
LGBTQI communities around the world have the support of the United States. That is not only a rhetorical position, it's a policy position. In February of 2021, President Biden issued an executive order calling for, once again, the policy of the United States, of our foreign affairs departments and agencies, to protect and to promote the rights of LGBTQI plus persons around the world. We do that in a number of ways. We, of course, do it rhetorically, but we also do it through programmatic funding for supporting the important work of advocacy organizations, for calling out abuses, repression, intimidation, violence against LGBTQI communities around the world. And of course, whether the community is the community of LGBTQI plus individuals or any other community, including marginalized communities, we always call for universal rights to be protected and to be enshrined in democratic institutions, and of course the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of expression, two of those important rights.
And very lastly, when you look at the media free speech in Georgia, we just previewed that, and when you look at the human rights record of the country, I know you don't preview any sanctions or speak about the hypotheticals, but still I just want to gather your thoughts on the general idea where the US government stands on that. When you look at those two venues of a country that is declared to be a partner of the United States, what is your major concern? How do you see the detrimental effect of the Georgia-US relations when you look at those two avenues, and that's the least?
Well, we do consider Georgia a strategic partner, and as a strategic partner, the United States is well positioned to encourage Georgia down the path of reform, to encourage Georgia to take on some of the improvements, some of the steps that we have talked about here. Of course, Georgia's aspirations don't occur overnight. They're impossible to realize over the course of a single year or even a single decade. It takes hard work, it takes patience, it takes significant resources to realize. Part of our task is to continue to partner with Georgia, to continue to support them down that path, to do that with resources, with guidance, with direct support in many cases, and that is an area where we will continue to cooperate closely with our Georgian partners. Yes?
On Ukraine, just going back to something last week, President Zelensky told Chatham House in London that he'd be open to start discussing things normally with the Russians if the Russian military pulled back to their position that they were at on February 23rd. He said something similar to Margaret Brennan on CBS News at the beginning of April. He mentioned the date February 24th. What does this administration understand that to mean? Does that mean the Russians need to pull out of the country or pull back to where their forces were already operating in parts of the Donbass? And then does that mean that Zelensky would be open to giving up parts of the Donbass to discuss with the Russians to move negotiations forwards?
The important point here is that it is not for us to define the objectives that our Ukrainian partners seek to achieve. It is the task of the Ukrainian government, which is in turn expressing the will of the Ukrainian people. It's a democratically elected government, a representative government, and it is up to that government on behalf of the Ukrainian people to define what their objectives in pushing back on Russian aggression should be. It is our task to support our Ukrainian partners in every appropriate way we can, to strengthen their hand at the negotiating table, recognizing that at the moment there are not high-level negotiations to speak of. We have heard very clearly from our Ukrainian partners that there has been no significant progress, that the Russian Federation has remained intractable in its positions. And so, of course, what we are doing now is two things. One, as I said before, supporting and strengthening the hand of our partners in Kyiv. And two, simultaneously, is imposing the massive costs and consequences that we have warned the Kremlin about since late last year. And in doing so, it is our hope to generate the conditions where dialogue, where good faith diplomacy can take place. And of course, more so than the process, we are most concerned about the outcome, seeing to it that our Ukrainian partners are successful in seeing their objectives through. To do that, we will continue to provide them with security assistance. We will continue to provide them with economic assistance. We will continue to provide our Ukrainian partners, the Ukrainian people, with what they need with humanitarian assistance in the meantime as well. Yes?
Just to follow to that, if your job is not to define their objectives, but it is to support your Ukrainian partners, at what point does that stop for those objectives and that support? Is there a limit to what the U.S. is willing to back?
Yeah, the U.S. Wants what the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government wants. It is a Ukraine that is democratic, a Ukraine that is independent, a Ukraine that is sovereign, a Ukraine that is free. Now, the contours of that, the specific objectives, will have to be defined by the Ukrainian government. what those objectives are to them, how they want to pursue those at the negotiating table. Those are not questions for us. Those are questions for our Ukrainian partners to sort through. Yes, Michael. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, thanks. So recently on this topic, the French President Macron implied that we should learn lessons from World War I and not punish Russia too severely. I was wondering if you could speak on the topic of whether the U.S. and its European allies support the same in-game scenario in Ukraine, and then more broadly, if you could choose your most ideal, realistic in-game in Ukraine, what would that be?
So I think your second question is just a clever way of asking the last question that was asked to me. It is not up to us to choose our ideal in-game. It is up to our Ukrainian partners to determine how they would like to see this conflict end. What we know is that they would, just like the United States, just like NATO, just like the international community, we would profoundly like to see this conflict end. We would like to see a cessation of the violence, a cessation of the bloodshed, a cessation of the atrocities that have inflicted the country of Ukraine over the past 82 days, owing to the brutality that Russia's forces are perpetrating against Ukraine's people, its state, and its government as well. Your first question...
Possible fissures between the Europeans' idea of what an in-game scenario would be like and what the United States in-game is?
We have any number of fora in which to discuss with our European partners and our European allies the long-term course of all of this. And I think there is no daylight between the United States and our European partners in the G7 and our European partners in the Quad, the European Quad, our European partners in the European Quint, our European partners at the EU, and our European partners more broadly, that we would like to see, and we know the Ukrainian people and government would like to see, and will see, a Ukraine that at the end of this conflict is free, it is independent, it is sovereign, and democratic. Yes. Sure.
Thank you, Nate. About the corona crisis in North Korea, it was reported that 3 North Korean cargo planes were carrying corona treatment medicine from China yesterday. Do you know that North Korea likes Chinese vaccines? What if North Korea requested assistance through COVAX? Will the United States agree with North Korea's, if North Korea wants assistance through COVAX?
Your question is, what has North Korea requested?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, to date, the DPRK has refused all vaccine donations from COVAX. I say it is unfortunate because we are deeply concerned about the apparent COVID outbreak within the DPRK, how it might affect the North Korean people, and the United States continues to support the provision of vaccines to the DPRK. We would like to see humanitarian, including medical relief, provided to the people of the DPRK. To that end, we strongly support and encourage the efforts of U.S. and international aid and health organizations in seeking to prevent and, as necessary, to contain the outbreak, the spread of COVID-19 in the DPRK, and to provide other forms of humanitarian assistance to the North Korean people. It is COVAX that determines allocations for the Pfizer vaccines. We have donated. Those are the brunt of the vaccines that we have donated. Should COVAX allocate doses to the DPRK, we would be supportive of that, as we would to any member of the grouping and to the African Union as well. As I said before, however, it is the DPRK that has consistently refused all vaccine donations. We don't currently have bilateral plans to share vaccines with the DPRK, but we continue to support, as I said before, those international efforts aimed at the provision of critical humanitarian aid to the most vulnerable within North Korea. There's another great irony, or perhaps it's even a tragedy, in that even as the DPRK continues to refuse the donation of apparently much needed COVID vaccines, they continue to invest untold sums in ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs that do nothing to alleviate the humanitarian plight of the North Korean people. The DPRK leadership continues to enrich themselves, to take care of their cronies, while the people of the DPRK suffer apparently now with the added burden of COVID.
There was previously that South Korean director of intelligence service said that there is a secret papers. He announced that the U.S. and South Korea previously suggested this through the COVAX, but Kim Jong-un refuses to help. Is that true?
We've discussed with our Republic of Korea allies, with our Japanese allies, and with others, ways that we might mitigate the humanitarian plight of the North Korean people. Unfortunately, it is the North Korean leadership that has prevented many of those steps from proceeding.
Lastly, do you think North Korea likely to put on hold nuclear test due to coronavirus?
We have never seen the DPRK regime prioritize the humanitarian concerns of their own people over these destabilizing programs that pose a threat to peace and security in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So I do not think there is any expectation of that. Yes, Nazira?
Thank you. Two questions, Mr. Price. One is about Akani's recent interview in CNN, and he said the United States is not our enemy. So good things. If United States not your enemy, United States has expectation to reopen girls' school, number one. Do you have the same, United States has the same position, establish friendship, new friendship with Akani Network, the leader of the Taliban?
It is our position that the women and girls of Afghanistan, including those girls who have been denied the opportunity to attend post-secondary education for weeks now, it is our strong position. It is the position of countries around the world, as you may have seen in a statement that came out from the G7 and other multilateral statements as well, that these girls should have the opportunity to attend school, to build skills, to develop the capacity to improve their own lives, to improve the lives of their families, and ultimately the welfare and the livelihood of their communities and their country. We've made the point before that any society that seeks to suppress, to hold back half of its population is not a society that can be thriving, is not even a society that can succeed. So, of course, we've seen the remarks from Siraj Haqqani. I think you will understand that we have developed a well-earned skepticism of these sorts of comments. We've heard these types of comments before. What we care much more about, rather than rhetoric, is action. And we await the Taliban acting on these positive signals and reopening schools at all levels across the country, which itself would be a very welcome development.
Okay, the second question, Mr. Price. Can you update the U.S. on Afghan funds frozen by the New York courts?
You may recall that several months ago now there was an executive order that came forth from the White House that spoke to the disposition of these $7 billion, approximately $7 billion in frozen assets. It provided for a sum, an element, a part of these assets to be used for the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. So that is something that we continue to work closely with our colleagues throughout the administration, including in the Department of Justice. But as you know, Nazira, we have continued to be the world's leader in terms of our humanitarian support to the people of Afghanistan, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars for education, for healthcare, for shelter, for food, for clean water, for sanitation, and for winterization projects at the appropriate time. We will continue to do that going forward using the humanitarian funding that we currently have available to us.
Thank
yes.
you.
Daphne?
On Taiwan has been trying to secure an invitation to the World Health Assembly, and 13 member states made a proposal for it to join. Was the U.S. one of the 13, and what is the U.S. doing to try to get Taiwan access to the WHO beyond public statements?
Well, we strongly advocate for the WHO to invite Taiwan to participate as an observer and lend its expertise to the solution-seeking discussions at the 75th World Health Assembly scheduled for this month. We believe that inviting Taiwan to participate as an observer would exemplify the WHO's stated commitment to an inclusive approach to international health cooperation and quote-unquote health for all. Taiwan, in that regard, is a highly capable, engaged, responsible member of the global health community with unique expertise and approaches that can benefit the world. We've made this point before, that Taiwan has much to share with the world in different realms, including in the realm of public health. And of course, Taiwan's absence from the WHO in recent years is something that we have sought to rectify. The WHO broke years of precedent at the 70th World Health Assembly in 20.